Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted you to, for a moment, think about what could have happened if our recent 4th of July earthquake, Ridgecrest earthquake, would have happened here in LA, one of the nearby faults. Imagine what would have happened to your life, what could have happened. I can give you some predictions of what FEMA thinks. If we were to follow a status quo, ladies and gentlemen, 40% of our businesses would not have been back. They would not be able to come back. 40% of our economy would not come back. If you were here back in Northridge, 1994, we saw thousands and thousands of units of residentials gone overnight. It's predicted that Northridge would be the big one that we're expecting would be 50 times larger than Northridge. For a moment, think about the homelessness, the problem with all these units that would not be available. Recently, I was doing some research, looking back some of the old photos of Northridge earthquake. I was here when Northridge happened, but I was near San Gabriel Valley at the time, so I really didn't see what immediately happened. But there were lines, miles of people waiting to receive fresh water. People living in parks with tents. So if you think about an event that is 50 times larger, this is something serious. We all know it now, or you wouldn't be here, or you wouldn't be watching us online. With that, I wanted to talk about what are the benefits of retrofitting, structural retrofitting of our buildings. Why should we do that? We talked about just now the social benefits. Social benefits. Housing is the big one. We all know that housing is a major problem in California. Affordable housing. We don't have enough housing, and the ones that we have are not affordable. So that's a major issue. Then, from an environmental point of view, many of these buildings, as you know, were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They have hazardous material. They have asbestos, they have lead. So if you imagine if they're demolished, somehow damaged, and that's when they pose a problem. As long as asbestos is in that floor, it's okay. Once it's damaged, and whatever it's inside, it's exposed to air, that's when the problems start. So if you have all these buildings sitting out there that are damaged, this is problem. When there is a storm event, it may get actually into our water table. If we have Santa Ana winds, it could get into our air and just travel all over Southern California. Then with that, also economic. What kind of business or government entity, or any entity for that matter, can survive if it loses 40% of its revenue? So it's a serious issue. I don't know of any. Now, one of the things that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I have a short video here for you. This is there are two buildings, one with retrofitting, and this was done in Japan. We got permission from Japan to use this video. This is one of the largest shake tables, earthquake shake tables in the world. And we don't have one here yet in LA or in California. We have one that only has one of these buildings, so we can do one at a time. I think you can tell which one didn't have earthquake, retrofitting, right? Okay. So this is real. Our technology now actually works. We improve the quality, structural integrity of these buildings by actually doing this work. It's not something that it's speculative. It's real. We have proven this. Now, with our businesses, our intent, ladies and gentlemen, with this series is to shed light on the reality of California and the disaster that we are all waiting and know it's coming for. We want to be prepared for that. And with that, we need to remove and eliminate certain myths that are out there. One of them is the issue of being a tenant versus an owner. A lot of times I speak to business executives and I ask them, well, have you wondered about the structural integrity of your building? And since most of these businesses are not owners of the building, the first thing they would say, oh, I don't own the building. Ladies and gentlemen, as we heard from Josh, it really doesn't matter if you own the building or not. If you have occupants in the building, either clients, customers that come and go, or employees, you're responsible for their welfare. And now we know that with this Paso Robles case, we can't rely on act of God, or we can't rely on just, oh, I'm in compliance because I started the plans. As you know, many of our buildings in LA, the concrete frame buildings have 25 years to comply. Can you imagine the amount of liability that carries? 25 years. Those buildings are mid-rise buildings on Wilshire and elsewhere. They may have hundreds of people in there. Here in Paso Robles, there were only 2 people, and it cost the owner more than the value of the building. So if you can imagine how many of these businesses, how many of these building owners are going to go bankrupt, basically, because they just cannot cover. If you have a building of an 8 or 10-story building with 200 people in it. So I did a very simple, I looked at the 2 spectrum, kind of on a less expensive end, a 2.5 building, because you can't buy much here in LA anymore for $2.5 million, as you all know. But it's a 10-unit apartment building, or it could be 6,000 or 7,000 square feet commercial building. It costs roughly, a building that you just saw there, it's a soft story building, it would cost you about $75,000 to retrofit. With that $75,000, we saw the fact that you can protect your equity, because there's less chances of that building collapsing and being out of commission. So then you have lots of cash flow. Once a building is damaged, you're not getting any revenues in. So, and you still have to pay your mortgage if you have one. That doesn't stop. Then you have negligence liability we talked about. We have death and injuries. Cost of demolition. What most people don't know, if, God forbid, your building is red tagged, and you have to demolish the building, which the city will make sure you do within so many days. They will come and give you a notice to demolish, and for maybe 180 days. And then if you do have asbestos, or the cost of demolition could be 4 times as much as cost of retrofitting. It's common sense, ladies and gentlemen. This is if you're a business. Business interruption and the loss of revenue. A lot of times these days, the inventory and also the equipment within the building is much more valuable than the building itself. A lot of our advanced technology companies and so on and so forth. We have lots of workforce. If you stop operating and you're trying to rebuild your business, it may take you 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, maybe longer. what's the reality of your employees sticking around for that long? They can't afford it. They're going to have to go look for other jobs. And you have a chance of losing your most important asset these days, your employees. Liability, we talked about it enough, and environmental concern. U.S. Green Building Council, we had a representative from at one of our events last year. He predicted that if when the big one happened, we don't have enough landfill in California to take our debris if we don't upgrade our buildings. We talked about loss of market share. This is another case that I'd like to cover very quickly because I'm running out of time. This is on the other spectrum. This is a multinational major business called Anheuser-Busch. If you lived around here, you've seen their plant on 405 in Van Nuys. I love this story because this really is the heart of why we're here, why it is important to be prepared. 48 years ago, when Sylmar earthquake happened, Anheuser-Busch sustained substantial damages. It was a 6.5 earthquake. We know some of the veterans building that collapsed. That was the first concrete frame building that we know of that collapsed, and it was a case study, major case study. But they had a prolonged period that they had to rebuild and so on and so forth. Well, right after that earthquake, they decided to spend $1.2 million to upgrade their existing building or to build their new buildings with some additional structural reinforcement. And ladies and gentlemen, in 1994, less than 20 years later, when Northridge happened, this was one of the only businesses in the valley that was standing, very, very minimal damage. In fact, they became a very important member of the community by producing a lot of water and distributing water that was badly needed for the community at that time. And in fact, they estimate that their savings was more than $1 billion for that $1.2 million that they spent. $750 million in economic advantage of the shutdown that they would have experienced, and about $350 million in building damage and so on. At that time, the values of the building. So this is really what we need to focus on, that seismic retrofitting shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be part of our business planning. Just like we have to pay our taxes, buy a liability insurance when we start a business. We don't question, oh, do we need the liability insurance or not? No, we do it. This should be part of our culture of doing business and our business planning. With that, I thank you all for participating in this very important symposium. On behalf of Optimum Seismic, I want to thank all of our partners that have really contributed with their wholeheartedly to this movement, and we're really honored and appreciate your partnership. Thank you.